Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Many politicians statewide have had the date October 12th marked on their calendars for 4 years. Tomorrow, Election Day, will have arrived. We will examine the elections tonight, including governor, statewide campaigns, key legislative contest, and in Jefferson Parish, the site of some of the most intense campaigning. We'll also look at a statewide issue with crime implications and at the condition of the juvenile justice system in New Orleans. On the ballot for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Clancy Dubose, political editor and columnist for Gambit Weekly. Mike Pearlstein, investigative reporter, WWL TV Channel 4. And Stephanie Grace, political columnist, The New Orleans Advocate. And we are in election season, finally coming to an end. Tomorrow is Election Day. Just 2 days for me worth of, these political flyers. Just 2 days worth. From the past 2 weeks, I'd have a stack like that. I guess you all would too. So first, let's talk about, governor's races, the big one on the, statewide. So how are we looking, Clancy, on that?
Well, several pollsters that I've spoken to all week long say, it's like that old Maxwell Smart line, missed it by that much. They're not saying that John Bel Edwards is missing it. They're saying he's right on the cusp. He's right there at 50%. So it really comes down, as we all like to say all the time, and perhaps people get tired of hearing it, but it really does come down to turnout. Will Edwards get the African-American voter turnout to comprise at least 26 or 27, if not 28% of the overall vote? African Americans in Louisiana comprise 31% of the electorate. The target for Democrats running statewide is generally 28 or 29% on election day in terms of what they comprise of the total votes cast. But because Edwards is getting more than a third of the white vote, he's got a little bit of a cushion there. But if the African American turnout is only about 25 or 26% of the overall turnout, it could be very close. And of course, Donald Trump is coming to Louisiana tonight,
right.
And we'll see if he has an impact.
So it is really, really that tight for him.
That's what the polls are showing. Now look, if you extrapolate out the African American vote, take the undecided black vote, and give that, or 2/3 or 3/4 of that to Edwards, and you pull out a little bit of the white undecided and extrapolate that, distribute it according to the way the rest of the decided vote is breaking, Edwards could be at 53, 54% of the decided vote.
And something to watch here, I think, is the less well-known candidates who often don't have an impact they could here. Because if John Bel Edwards does have a runoff, so the question is going to be, do all of the votes against him, are they still against him the next time around? Are they all Republican votes? There are 2 Republicans, of course, but there's also another Democrat who is an African-American Democrat who's been getting a little support from Republican PACs who are trying to divert a few Democratic votes away from John Bel. And there's a guy named Gary Landrieu who's running as an independent, and is a cousin of the Landrieux we know.
Ultra-conservative independent. Yeah.
But he's not an R. So
right.
On the ballot, if people see Landrieu, that could peel away a few Democratic votes too. And again, when you're that close to 50% plus one,
that's right.
Could make the difference.
And for Landrieu, it's just the Landrieu name. Some people could just reflexively,
right,
check on him.
And that's, I think, the play. But then, you have Edwards, so it's also kind of which Edwards too. So you have the 2 biggest Democratic names out there.
Even among people who really like Donald Trump, how strong do you think Trump's coattails are?
Well, among the people who really like Donald Trump, the 40% nationally, and in Louisiana, it's probably around 45%. They're already with the Republicans. They're not with Edwards. I'm talking about the die-hard people who just won't vote for a Democrat on a dare. That's the die-hard Trump voter. You've also got, as we saw in 2018, the suburban vote, the suburban women's vote. The moderate conservative. They might be Democrat or Republican, but they're conservative but moderately so, not right-wing. Trump talks to the right wing all the time. The question is, can he move some of that moderate vote? There have been several polls that I've seen this week. In one of them, Edwards was getting 34 to 35% of the white vote. In another one, he was getting 37 to 38%. If he gets 35 or more % of the white vote, it's going to be hard for him not to win.
And remember,
frankly.
he did pretty well in those groups in 2015
Yes,
when
he
he was
did. He
up
got like
against David
38%.
Vitter, who also I think a lot of women looked at and said, and Trump could have the same effect.
You know,
Let's face it, but despite the D by his name, he does, uphold a lot of those mainstream Republican values on things
Guns,
like
abortion. I mean, he could
guns,
lose some
Second
Democratic
Amendment.
votes on
That's right.
abortion.
Republicans have 3 arrows in their quiver when they run against a Democrat nationally: abortion, Second Amendment, and taxes.
Taxes.
In Louisiana, they've only got 1 arrow, and it's taxes. And Edwards' response is, well, more than half of the Republicans in the legislature voted for the sales tax package. So he softens that, and I think I think the reason we saw those ads at the end about Johnny Anderson and the sexual harassment and the woman who was the victim in that case, going on TV, talking into the camera, talking to John Bell Edwards, saying, "You don't help me. You didn't stand by me." That was a very effective ad. That was a compelling ad. I think it softened up some of his support. But the polls are showing only a little bit of a weakening. But you never know by election day. It might just get people to stay home.
The
That's
other
all
thing,
it takes.
I feel like a lot of times the also ran candidates and the undecided voter, by election day, they start to gravitate towards who they perceive as the front runners. They may say, "I like this candidate, but he's not going to win." All right, and so I'm going to go for one of those 3. And so I see, no matter what they're showing for some of the also ran candidates, those people losing support and they're going in front of the
I
big
mean, they
3.
never
Polls are
had
not
much
showing a whole lot of
support.
votes
It's
for
just-
Landrieu and the others.
Yeah.
They're getting
but
like
it
3
really
or 4%.
doesn't take. It could take 3 or 4%.
Right.
That, yeah.
So, in terms of national politics and state politics, I mean, what is this race showing us right now?
Well, the Republicans traditionally in Louisiana, because we are a ruby red state, want to nationalize all of our statewide races, not just the ones for senator or Congress members. They're not statewide, but they all run together statewide. And they want to constantly make a governor's race about national issues. David Vitter tried it 4 years ago. It's been tried almost all the time. Interestingly, the Republicans who win the governor's race run local races. Bobby Jindal, Mike Foster, Dave Treen, they run local races. Governor's races in Louisiana historically have been local, not national. But this cycle and the last cycle, the Republicans have pounded national issues. Vitter was on immigration and hanging, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton around John Bell Edwards, and now they're trying to do the same thing, but they're throwing in Nancy Pelosi.
And the squad.
But
yeah.
by and large, Louisiana voters don't respond to that. I mean, the die-hard, right-wing, hardcore Trump voters, yeah, they love all that, but they've already got all the red meat they need. They're already voting for Republicans.
But in
They got
reality,
to move beyond that.
in the runoff of the election that elected John Bell Edwards 4 years ago, the runoff issue was Vitter's private life. That was, that was
It
really.
was Vitter, period.
Yeah.
Not just his
Yeah.
private life, but just who this guy is and do we not like him. And, he made himself unlikable to the electorate by attacking his fellow Republicans, not by going after the Democrat. If you recall, Vitter didn't attack John Bell Edwards in the primary until maybe the very, very, very end. I think even then it was a pack, not Vitter. He waited till the runoff to go after John Bell Edwards. It was the other Republicans who tried to attack a little bit. And what Vitter did was attack his fellow Republicans, and that turned off a whole lot of moderates and Republicans.
But don't you think there are some people in the Republican hierarchy who are privately saying, "Let John Bell win.
Yes,
He's term
I
limited."
Oh yeah,
absolutely
we'll,
think
we'll
that.
come back because
And then we'll do our
someone want to
politics.
be governor in
Yeah.
4 years.
4 years, yes. And
notice that-
here's something that I think is really happening. It's not bad for Republicans to have John Bell as governor because they get, he raised taxes, he stabilized the budget. They get to attack him. They get to say, "Oh, he's a big," but we
Spender.
have stability.
And they get to
and
spend the
listen,
money. That's the
Yeah.
best benefit.
And a side effect of that is that the Republican establishment, all the way up to Trump, has not gotten behind either of the two
Yeah.
Correct.
Republican frontrunners.
Including a sitting
That's been an
congressman.
Achilles heel of both of those guys.
So
The
in
Yeah.
fact
a way,
that
it
the
almost
Republicans couldn't choose.
There's not
Tell
going
us
to be
yourself.
that.
Well, remember, President Trump
fanatical
asked Steve
response.
Scalise to get in even after they were both off and running. So certainly the National Party looked at these two and said, "What else you got?"
the-
No, it makes them look
The
like
two
Tweedledee,
biggest-
Tweedledum. Like
Yeah.
either or, either one will
Yeah,
do.
Thank you.
whatever.
I did call him Tweedledee, Tweedledum. in my
And I had
column.
a column that said either
But
or. So
The two biggest conservative endorsements, well, 3 when you throw in the religious right, but Lobby and the Louisiana State Republican Party both split. They both said either one is okay. So if the Republicans can't choose, how can they expect voters to choose? And that was the
Right.
dynamic up until about 2 weeks ago.
And that's just less than a ringing endorsement of
Exactly.
either of those guys.
Yeah.
Okay. let's move on.
Move
to
on.
something
Right.
else.
Yeah.
I mean, I love watching you guys with this discussion. It's
Right.
absolutely terrific.
What, there are
Let's go-
other races?
Yes,
Okay.
there are. Hey, over to you. We do have some other statewide
Well, to answer
races.
your question, it could be no. There are no other races, but okay. In addition to the governor's race, there are 6 other statewide races on the ballot. In all of them, except one which we'll talk about, that the incumbent seems to be in pretty good shape. They're all Republicans. All the incumbents are Republicans. There was an effort somewhere along, I guess there was an effort to have at least a Democrat in every race, except an insurance commissioner. The insurance commissioner is the only one where you have 2 Republicans. And so, but if you look at the Republican incumbents with Billy Nungesser as Lieutenant Governor, Kyle Ardoin, Secretary of State, and Jeff Landry as Attorney General, John Schroeder, who was really recently elected as treasurer, and then we got Commissioner of Agriculture and Commissioner of Insurance. The Commissioner of Agriculture race is the only race where you have a large field, and they have 5 people. And I know, Clancy, you've got a theory about that race.
Well, I've heard of a couple of polls that showed Strain, like Edwards, is right on the cusp of winning it, but there's unlike the governor's
he's the
race, there's a
incumbent, so-
huge, yes, Mike Strain is the incumbent agriculture commissioner running for, I think, his 3rd or 4th term. I think it's 3rd, but by and large, he's considered to be a pretty honest guy, certainly, and somebody who's done a good job. The one knock against him is that he didn't act fast enough or get the program moving quickly enough on medical marijuana. But now that that program has been rolled out, it's in effect, people love it.
And he's also someone who's just not seen as partisan, as very
Right,
partisan, which
he's
is
a very,
interesting.
he hasn't been out there with all the red meat on Trump and
No.
hasn't been knocking the governor. He's a guy who gets along with everybody, and yet there's a huge undecided in that race, unlike the governor's race. So he could win with 60% of the vote, or he could wind up in a runoff. because
Insurance
it's just
commissioner.
very
Let me
mushy.
get you to comment on that. There's just 2 in the insurance commissioner.
just 2, both
Donlin, longtime,
Republicans.
insurance
Donlin
commissioner.
and
Tim Temple.
Tim Temple.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
And prior to Donlin, of the last 4 insurance commissioners, 3 of them went to jail. And so, if nothing else, you can say that Donlin added stability and hasn't gone to
But
jail.
he's in trouble in that race. Temple has hit him really hard. Donlin's responding, but he's probably the most vulnerable of the incumbents. Not because he's done anything wrong, but because his opponent has really hit him hard, and people are all complaining about auto insurance
He's seeking
rates.
what term would this be for him? 4th, 5th?
I think it would be his
Fifth?
4th.
Yeah,
He had a
4th.
piece of a term and then 3.
Okay. All righty. Let's move to legislative races now. Steph, to you.
Okay, a whole lot of them because of term limits, remember? So a lot of people who've been in the legislature a long time forced out. So there are a lot of open seats with a lot of candidates. I should tell you, I'm in a district with 7 candidates for an open legislative seat. 6 of them are spending money on mailers. I can't believe my pile. That's 98. That's to replace Neil Abramson in Uptown New Orleans. Another big crowded race in Walt Leger's old district, another crowded race in Joe Bowie's old district. He's running for Senate, so he's not term limited, but that's an open seat. There's an open seat for Senate, J.P. Morrell's district. There's a very contested one where Clancy lives.
Out here
Stephanie
in Mid-City and Lakeview and Lakefront and
Metairie,
Bucktown,
yeah.
parts of Metairie, House District 94. Stephanie Hilferty is a conservative but not rabidly right-wing Republican freshman state representative. She's got a young man named Kurt Williamson running against her from the hard right, and she's got a Democrat, a traditional liberal Democrat running against her. So she's in the middle, and there's some questions about is she going to get squeezed out. She's got quite a few signs, certainly in the Orleans portion, which is 60% of the district in terms of voter registration, and probably even a little bit higher on turnout, but it's going to be interesting to see
And the
how that race
Republican
shakes out.
groups are split, and it's interesting because she's a Republican incumbent, but
Yeah.
there are Republican formal groups that are opposing her from the right.
And
And that's happening around the state, too.
A lot of the flyers here are for the Bohannon and Talbot race.
Yes, that's
Right,
a hot one.
both Republicans, and that's going to be a real showdown. That's to succeed Danny Martini, state senator in Senate District 10, which includes Kenner, River Ridge, Harahan, and all the areas in between. And that's a very hot race. Talbot is a 3-term, term-limited Republican state representative from Harahan, so it's kind of a territorial war between
Right.
Kenner and River Ridge, Harahan.
He was one of the fiscal hawks. That's kind of his. what
Voted
he's
against
known
the sales
for.
tax. He was part of the caucus of no, frankly, and but that plays well in various parts of that district. Rita Bohannon is from Kenner, so a lot of the Kenner Pauls have lined up behind her. They want to keep that seat in Kenner.
And one of the issues there is that Kirk Talbot pushed a bill that proponents said would have lowered car insurance rates, opponents said would not have. It did not get through, and she's really hitting him on not being able to get that bill through.
And but at some point, even he had to admit when the bill was going through
Yeah.
that it was not it was not a guarantee that rates
Right.
would go down. It would only
Right.
make them
They were-
come in and file for a rate case.
And that's
and
how
open
he's
it
using
up.
that in the race, saying, I tried and it
Yes.
got beaten. But,
And she's saying, well, you failed.
but,
So
but without that actually having passed, he's able to say, here's what it would have done.
that's true. Yeah.
Okay, well, while we're talking about car insurance rates, let's go over to you, Mike. And that certainly is something that we all suffer through here. If we live in South Louisiana, we've got high car insurance rates. So
Second highest
there's-
in the nation.
Yeah. So why?
And there are a lot of factors, and it is interesting that somehow in this political cycle we've reached something of a tipping point where candidates in races from the governor on down, not just insurance commissioner, are latching onto this issue, promising to be on behalf of the insurers who are getting hit with these astronomical car insurance rates. I have a teenager who started to drive, so I know firsthand it's pain in the wallet. And there are a lot of factors that contribute to this, starting with bad roads, infrastructure, bridges, the still stubbornly high percentage of uninsured drivers, and now what we're seeing is this legal climate of billboard lawyers, constant TV ads, almost promising a jackpot. If you get hit, call me. And that, in the eyes of Jim Dolan, the current insurance commissioner, among others, has left an opportunity for people to commit fraud. And there's a fraud element that increases our insurance rates. But even in legislative districts where a single legislator, by him or herself, can't really move the needle on dropping our car insurance rates, it's become one of their primary issues that they're campaigning on. And look for whatever efforts Talbot was trying last legislature.
Call it tort reform.
Tort
What it really
reform.
is, it's
Right.
keep people from suing insurance companies.
The big legal issue and legal
Yeah.
climate that kind of leads to all this is going to be an issue, regardless of
Yes.
who ends up getting
That's
elected.
right.
Well, tort reform has that crept into the governor's race too, doesn't it always?
Oh, very
And
much
Yeah,
it's
so.
trial
always-
law, because Edwards gets a lot of support from trial lawyers, and the Republicans always get support from big business and insurance companies and millionaires.
Ralph Abraham in particular is really pushing this.
What's
and
that?
Ralph Abraham in particular is really pushing this issue. And I think
Everybody
there-
likes to blame lawyers until they need one. Interesting.
Exactly.
Abraham is the one candidate who actually sued an oil company.
as John Bell Edwards loves to point out, loves to.
That's right. So the argument is certainly lawyers, and you are a lawyer, speaking as a lawyer over there, argue that if there is not the chance for people to sue, you're depriving them of their rights as opposed to having the tort reform. So
Well, Mike touched upon what I think are, and even Jim Donlan, and when he sat across from us at Gambit interviewing with us, said that the biggest drivers of our high insurance rates are the bad roads, and something like 40% of the drivers in Louisiana are uninsured. That's what drives it up. If we could, just do that, and the tort reformers want to lower the threshold for jury trials. Okay, I don't think that's going to change. That's not going to move the needle on insurance rates. But
we're
it's
among
not-
the highest in the
Right.
but it's-
country.
that's not a bad idea. Don't get me wrong. I'm not against that. Because if you have a good case, it doesn't matter.
It plays into the politics of the fact that we have elected judges.
Elected judges.
Right.
Where do they
that's
get
right.
their campaign
Right,
contributions?
Yeah.
But the thing that nobody can
plaintiff's
really
bar.
prove is, would these changes lower insurance rates or not? That's the debate.
Well, certainly everyone's promising that they can do
Yes.
something about it.
okay. All right, let's look now to Jefferson Parish. There's some
Yes.
hotly contested races over there. Let's start with the president first.
Presidents Cynthia Lee Sheng, John Young, really going at each other. Two very well-known politicians. Cynthia Lee Sheng, 10-year veteran of the parish council, has a lot of support, a lot of endorsements. John Young trying for a comeback. He was the parish president. He came in after Aaron Broussard, so remember he was the guy who kind of cleaned things up, and people liked him. He was popular, and he didn't have any big scandals. But then he left to run for lieutenant governor, lost very badly to Billy Nungesser, and is trying for a comeback. So it's kind of a little bit of the past and the future. And things are just very heated, and
And there's
I
a
know
third candidate
there's a
in
thard
there.
candidate who could throw it into a runoff.
So
There's that
what is
too.
it looking like right now, poll-wise? Who's leading?
The polls I've heard about say that Lee Sheng is in front, but that Bonnet-Carrere is getting anywhere from 6 to 10% of the vote, and that could certainly be enough to throw it into a runoff. Lee Sheng was in front anywhere from 7 to 11%. So depending on what Bonnet-Carrere gets, and depending on the turnout and Well, Jefferson Parish now has a significant African American vote. Where does that go? Because it's been kind of bouncing around. And
And
the
it's
polls,
interesting because they're both, the two lead candidates are Republicans, and they're both kind of running these side campaigns to try
Yeah.
to appeal to those voters.
So-
This
There's
is what I was talking
possibility
about
of
earlier.
runoff.
Why would that 10% vote for Bonacaire hold until tomorrow when it's obvious it's going to be between the
well,
other two?
first of all, I watched the debate. There was a half-hour debate among the three candidates on Channel 4, and Bonacaire, for a little-known candidate, he had some sort of out there kind of off the rails comments, but he also had some pretty good comments where I could see where somebody who really was tired of the back and forth between Lee Sheng and Young, tired of the attacks, and Young's mounting most of the attacks, would say, you know what, this is a nice old guy. I like him, makes sense. It's kind of a protest vote. And there's always one election where people give a protest vote. I don't know that that's going to be it, but you just don't know.
And sometimes it's an election like this where they look at the two lead candidates and they feel like probably either would be fine. There's neither
Neither
they
one
don't
is
want to vote
scandalized.
against
Yeah.
either of them.
Okay, let's touch on
So,
sheriff now, JP.
Sheriff Joe Lopinto was elected just last year in a race against Johnny Fortunato, longtime sheriff office spokesman. Lopinto's had a good year. He's gotten good reviews. He's gotten some endorsements from people who opposed him last time. And Johnny Fortunato is running again, but he's had real trouble raising money. He just it's
Doesn't have a media campaign.
no,
And
and
it really looks like his shot was the last.
it
really
was.
was.
And he sunk it with his
Endorsement of
Endorsement
Michael
of
Yannet,
Mike
yeah.
Yeah. So Lopinto should win that one. I don't like to make predictions, but that's a lopsided
think
looking
so.
race.
At large. And JP.
Scott Walker, Paul Johnston. So Paul Johnston, the longtime elected official, district representative Scott Walker, the newcomer, former television anchor, now owns a donut shop, running a pretty energetic race, but Paul Johnston has really the institutional support. I guess the one thing I'd say is candidates like Paul Johnston sometimes run into trouble with Jefferson voters, the guys who've been on the parish council for a long time. And sometimes the voters just kind of say, yeah, what else is out there? And
And he's done nothing wrong. He's had no scandals. He's been a solid vote. Shows up, does his job, but he's not a very telegenic candidate
Yeah.
and not a very energetic candidate. But his answers on all the issues are spot on. And in fact, his answers on a lot of the questions we had for him again, but were better than Walker's. But Walker just has so much more energy, and you can do nothing wrong. But if you've been around for a long time, they'll just say, "Let's try something new,"
Yeah.
even though there's nothing pushing people away from you. And that's what he's fighting.
And that's the at-large seat, council at-large seat for East Bank,
No,
right? Is that?
They're both
they're,
up.
they're parish-wide.
both- they are.
There's an
Okay.
unwritten rule,
that.
an unwritten wink, wink. One from the
Yeah.
East Bank, one from the West Bank.
Okey-doke.
The traditional West Bank seat for at-large has already been decided because Ricky Template has no opponent.
Okay, all right, well, tomorrow's the day. We haven't really talked about expected turnout. What is expected?
I think they're saying mid-40s. Is that what you're hearing?
That's pretty high.
Is-
For
That's what I think the Secretary of State has
yeah, mid-40s
predicted.
would be a pretty
would
significant
be
And that
good.
early
turnout.
voting was strong, if that's any
It was.
indicator.
It was.
Some
okay.
people
But it
were
was
wondering whether
stronger
that was
among
the
Republicans,
yeah.
and it was kind of the black turnout in the early voting was somewhat depressed compared to not only white turnout but Republican turnout. So that's another factor that the prognosticators, and I'm not one of them,
Right.
are saying,
But
well,
then there
I
are
think this
others
could go
who
to a runoff
say
in the
there are
governor's
others who
race.
say don't read too much into the early voting.
Right.
So,
The truth is, we don't have, when it was absentee voting, we
Yeah.
had decades of history.
Yeah.
We only have one other race 4 years ago
Mm-hmm.
where early voting was a significant factor because
Yeah.
before that it was really low. And now it's up around 20 to 23%. It's slowly climbing. People are getting more accustomed to early voting. I think after this race, then we'll have 2 election cycles of
Yeah.
early voting. They can look back and see if there's a trend.
Okay. All right, go to polls tomorrow, Election Day. All right, guys, thanks a lot. Great discussion about our elections coming up. We're going to wrap up the discussion, though, with New Orleans juvenile court. And there was a bond handed down that was really like an adult court bond recently.
In fact, much higher than even adult, murder suspects. A 14-year-old got a bail set at $950,000. Now that was tallied by 11 different crimes, 5 carjacking counts. Each of the carjacking counts carried a $100,000 bail by the judge, Mark Doherty. What also enhanced and also brought a lot of news attention to this 14-year-old was the fact, and I exposed this in an investigative story that I did for Channel 4, he had just been released prior to this alleged carjacking spree and the spree itself was harrowing, in which drivers were punched in the face, dragged out of their driver's seat, thrown to the ground to have the
And
car
there was a spurt
stolen.
of them that happened in a short amount of time.
It was
too.
about a 24 to 30 hour period of carjackings, using then the stolen cars to commit burglaries, another assault, even walking into convenience stores and shoplifting and grabbing snacks. It was a little bit of a reign of terror. But the key issue for the 14-year-old is that he had been arrested. I think he had 17 prior cases in juvenile court. But more recently, it escalated to 2 gun crimes, 2 crimes involving a gun. One was a false imprisonment, which he was holding a girl at gunpoint, and then he was later caught in a car burglary with the gun, where the owner came out with his own gun, and there was a standoff. Police called. He was arrested. He was detained by Judge Mark Doherty, juvenile court Judge Mark Doherty. About 10 days later, released by another juvenile court judge, Tammy Stewart.
And so then Doherty came back.
Doherty was the duty judge. He just happened to be on duty for the month, setting bail, and he saw the person he had already detained, who got released, and I guess did not instill a lot of confidence that he could do well on bail by going on this spree that involved 2 16-year-old accomplices. And it ended up being a very, kind of a tragedy all around, because there's a big movement, as we've, discussed before, to find alternatives to incarceration for, youngsters who can be rehabilitated.
Right.
But the key there is nonviolent, though, right?
Well, once you start to commit those kind of acts of violence, the threat to the community is so great. And the thing that I guess holds back this reform movement is that there isn't the money for the programs, for these alternatives, for some sort of counseling. When you're a 14-year-old engaged in that kind of behavior, allegedly, clearly you're in need of some services, and that wasn't there. Right after getting released, he goes on a spree. He's locked up, and
But there's
it looks,
sizable bail now.
and not even unless you're a Tilly Hankton in criminal court, no one's making $1 million bail.
Okay. All right. I'm sure this is something you're going to continue to
Yes,
be
we'll
looking
follow
into.
that case.
All right, guys. We have 1 minute for wrapping up here, so real quick.
Back to the election, there's 4 constitutional amendments on tomorrow's ballot. Of interest locally is number 4, which allow the city council to declare property tax exemptions for units of 15 or buildings 15 units or less. It's an affordable housing action.
All right. Okay, Clarence.
The city council this coming week, next week, has a huge rate case hearing with Entergy. It's something that we all need to watch.
Okay, Mike.
Hey, some people watching this may be watching on DVR because they're at the Pelicans preseason game, the one and only that's being held in New Orleans. But just made me, think about what a great sports, phase we're in with both Tulane, LSU, college football, the Saints hitting on all cylinders, and the hype about Zion Williamson
It's
and the
where we
Pelicans
like to be.
all happening
Okay.
at the same
We've hit
time.
the
Stephanie,
sweet
real
spot.
quick,
Amazing.
real
Mayor
quick.
LaToya Cantrell introducing the budget this coming week. Expect a lot of talk about what's going to happen with these property taxes given the new higher assessments.
Okay, doke. All right, guys. Thanks a lot for being here. Thank you all for joining us. Go vote. Have a good evening. See you next week.